Coming up next, Book TV presents Afterwards, an hour-long program where we invite guest hosts to interview authors. This week, former Homeland Security Secretary Tom Ridge discusses his book, The Test of Our Times, in which he talks about resigning as governor of Pennsylvania to head the first new government department in a generation. He describes the politics of his former post and recommends changes in several agency operations he believes would better protect the nation. Governor Ridge discusses his book with USA Today correspondent Mimi Hall.
Hello, I am Mimi Hall. I'm a White House reporter with USA Today. But from shortly after the 9/11 attacks all the way through the Bush administration, I covered Homeland Security. And I'm here today with the nation's first Homeland Security Secretary, Tom Ridge, who has written a new book, The Test of Our Times, talking about his first few years putting together the nation's first department. Welcome.
Mimi, it's interesting. I remember those days when I was standing at a press table and you were out in the audience, so it's nice to join you again.
That's right. We all had a big learning curve together. Just by way of a little background, Tom Ridge was in his second term as governor of Pennsylvania when the 9/11 attacks happened. Shortly thereafter, he got a call from the White House asking him to come to Washington and be the president's first Homeland Security advisor. It was a terrible, confusing, chaotic, frightening, and very important time for our country, and your job was to do something we had never tried to do before, which was secure the entire country against the possibility of another attack that could come by air, by sea, across a border, in any form that we couldn't even imagine. And those were interesting time for you.
Interesting times, challenging days. I mean, the entire country, not just the political world, but nearly 300 million Americans had to adjust to a new threat. And I think, I dare say, if you took a poll right after September 11, 2001, most people for a long time had the lingering fear that something was going to happen again, maybe just as calamitous, just as horrific. Fortunately, it hasn't happened, but one of the reasons I wrote the book is to try to explain to people, at least from my perspective, to the reader, that the threat is real. We can't afford the complacency of the luxury of complacency. But I also try to explain to people we made a lot of progress, and we shouldn't be breathless about it. It's a new threat environment, a different enemy, but we can deal with it.
And that's something I want to get back to later in the interview, is your concern that we may have lost the sense of urgency as a country and as a government about the threat of attack. But let's start with something that anyone who's been watching the news lately has seen about your book, the controversial passage or two deep in the book, page 236 roughly, which is about a time shortly before the 2004 election when Osama bin Laden had released yet another tape, and the officials at the highest level of our government, yourself included, had to decide whether or not it warranted raising the threat level. But let me start with, why don't you explain what the threat levels were? You developed a color-coded system designed both to alert the public about possible threats, but also to trigger lots of security across our country in the event that officials felt it was needed. So talk about that a little bit, about that system.
Thanks, Marie. There are three, I guess if we're going to talk about the threat advisory system, there would be three dimensions that I would want people to understand. Everybody's focused on one, that's the colors. Now, when we designed the system, it could have been colors, it could have been an alphabet, letter of the alphabet, it could have been a number. So that's the first dimension. How do we signal? Letters, colors, alphabet. Secondly, what do they mean? Well, each color means that there's a certain prearranged level of security, of preparedness. So if you go to a certain color, that means your security goes to a certain level. The third was the process that was designed to make sure that this very difficult decision was rendered through the collective judgment of people that the president trusted. And the system was something like this. For lack of a better term, I would say that the president had a large cabinet, but he also had like a Homeland Security cabinet. Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, CIA, FBI, Attorney General, Secretary of Homeland Security, and a couple others. And whenever our respective intelligence groups or circumstances warranted, these principles would meet. And if there was a consensus within this group that we raise the threat level, i.e. a certain color, certain level of preparedness, then the threat warning was used. We raised the threat level. Candidly, we recite, we'll probably get into that incident before the election. We met several times during my tenure, and you don't know about the times that we met and said, nah, the intelligence doesn't warrant it, that we just don't think we're there yet. May not have been unanimous, but there was a consensus, no, we shouldn't go up, and we didn't raise it. So that's the three dimensions: the colors, what it meant, certain level of preparedness, and how we reached that decision. I look back on many of the discussions I've had over the past couple of days about the book and about this passage, and I even say in the front of the book that in spite of what people say, even the president couldn't raise the threat level. The system was designed so that could not happen.
Right. Well, let's take us to the days before the election. We have a new tape from bin Laden. So the question becomes, do we raise the threat level? Now, the background for this is on previous occasions when the threat level had been raised, particularly as we got closer to the election, Democrats and the news media would question whether the administration might be using the threat level for political purposes. No evidence that anybody was, but these questions were coming up because everybody could see over time that typically when the threat level went up, the president's approval ratings did as well. So now we're approaching Election Day. President Bush is in a very tight re-election campaign, and the question becomes whether it should be raised. And you are in one of many secure meetings that you had. And let me read from the book here about a concern that you expressed that you had at the time. Yeah. Talking about the former Attorney General, John Ashcroft, you said, a vigorous, some might say dramatic discussion ensued. Ashcroft strongly urged an increase in the threat level and was supported by Rumsfeld. That's Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. There was absolutely no support for that position within our department. None. I wondered, is this about security or politics? Post-election analysis demonstrated a significant increase in the president's approval rating in the days after the raising of the threat level.
Right.
Since word about this came out, you have talked about how you were just musing, that you're not making an accusation that anybody was using politics, but that you were musing about what was going on, what it was that you didn't know that maybe they knew. But Donald Rumsfeld, spokesman, put out a pretty strong statement. Yep. So some people were definitely taken aback by this. So talk about.
Well, you know, it's and I feel bad about that because I have enormous regard for my two colleagues. The fact of the matter is, number one, the process worked. We didn't raise the threat level. We were absolutely convinced internally that we shouldn't go up. And these are men whose judgment is very well respected, and I put it into perspective. We just didn't see any reason to be going up whatsoever. And I use the word dramatic, and it was. Look, this is the weekend before a national presidential election. If you go back and kind of Google and take a look at what's going on, even the media is speculating. Will they go up? Will they postpone the election? Is it in the best interest of the country to go up? And so people were assured we're in a heightened level of security in spite of the tape. Make sure you go vote. There's all kinds of political discussions going on outside our particular discussion internally. There is no doubt in my mind that on that occasion and all the other times that we met when Secretary Rumsfeld and Attorney General Ashcroft were involved in the similar discussions, that their view was based on what they thought was in the best interest of America, pure and simple. I'm not second guessing that. But I'm writing this book 4 years later. I'm thinking back about it because I had really no specific recollection of what transpired there, the specific event, other than they were they had a strong opinion. These are two very strong-willed men who can articulate their views strongly. I thought they did. And I just kind of, and I think musing is the right word. Was it politics? Small p, big P, not second-guessing them because this is a system that we had deployed many, many times. I mean, there's notion that I was pressured. Nobody in that group can be pressured. You take a look at the personalities that we're talking about. So I regret the inference that I'm second-guessing them, but a lot of suggestions politically that we might want to do some things in the best interest of the country. Should we raise it? And would people feel more secure or less secure? I've been told afterwards by some people who participated in that there was some kind of political discussion. I don't remember that. All I do remember is that neither on that occasion or any other occasion do I feel my colleagues were motivated by politics.